Hello, everybody. You are on Becoming Quantum Conscious, and my name is Bart Sharp. We are on United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 107.7 and 103.5, broadcasting out of the beautiful city of New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm sure it's beautiful down there. I am in Austin, Texas. And also, we are a podcast, a internet radio show, and God, cable television. It's always surprising. I'm always grateful for Joe Maltado and Michelle Deverchet for putting all of this together. I just got to do a radio show. What fun and pleasure that is. Also, thinking of all of these vehicles that we are on, you can also find my own YouTube page at Bart Sharp -1. Become a subscriber. I put that invitation out there, but also you can go to the UPRN Talk Radio website or .com, as they say, and check in there, as well as other YouTube, Facebook, also Roku. So we're spread out there. And today I have Perdita Finn, who's been on my show 3 times now, I think. A prolific writer, a professional writer, all types of, you've been writing all your life, I think, with that. Author of Take Back the Magic, a wonderful book, and then Way of the Rose, which she wrote with her husband, Clark Strand, about the spirituality and the magic of rosary beads. It's a lot more than that, trust me. And today, you are about to embark on the release of a new book in May, The Mothers of Magic.
Exactly. Thank you, Bert. I love talking to you. You are one of the people who give me hope in the world and joy in my heart. It really feels wonderful to be back.
Well, thank you. We're both on an adventure. That's what I like about you and your books, is you get to see a glimpse of Perdita's adventure, and it's good. It's one thing to read things in theory about how adventure and magic and the other worlds exist, and nature, and how it all intertwines, and how we learn that through our relationships. But you give so much practical knowledge in your books, and Mothers of Magic is right down that line. It's so, every story gives you insight on how a person does it, mainly Perdita Finn and people you've known, people you've experienced. And maybe we want to start with what is the basic theme of Mothers of Magic?
Well, I'll tell you a story. You go to France a lot, and I'll tell you something to look for.
Okay.
And it's, when I was in France in 2015, I love going in little old forgotten churches, and I love just poking around and seeing where spirit leads me, right? But I began noticing something. I began noticing in church after church in rural churches around France, you'd come into one of these little, stone buildings, and off on the side would be the Lady Chapel to the Madonna, right? And there'd be some candles lit in front of a statue of the Madonna.
Yep.
But she wasn't ever alone. And on one side of her would be Joan of Arc. And there was Joan in her armor, and she'd have a sword in her hand and a shield in the other, ready to take down some of the English. And then on the other side of the Madonna would be Saint Anthony. And there he was in his monk's robes, long to the floor, cradling in his hand the infant Jesus, the baby. And in the other hand would frequently be a flower, a lily. And so I'm looking at this, and I know I'm looking at something big, and I'm trying to take it in. And what I began to realize is the mother is never singular. Mothers know that you need more mothers in the room, that one mother is never enough. and the Madonna can't do it by herself. She's got to have Joan there with her sword. And she also needs St. Anthony there to be gentle and tender and put the baby to sleep for her so she can get a break and read a book. And, you know, that, that, and it was also telling me something about gender, which I think in this crazy age we live in is worth thinking about, which is a mother can be a woman who's a warrior,
Mm-hmm.
and a mother can be a man who is a nurturer. That mother has become a very gendered word in our culture. And in fact, it's a word that if you go back, say, to the Kogi people in Colombia, they call their wise ones mamas. The mamas. The mamas are the men or women who have spiritual wisdom to share. And if you suddenly I began looking all around the world, and you follow any religion back, I don't care whether it's Hinduism or Judaism or whatever, you always begin to find not one mother, not one Madonna, but 9. The Kogi people
Mm-hmm.
have 9. In Iceland, they're the 9 goddesses who will give birth to a singular god collectively together. In Greece, we have the 9 muses. Muse seems like it's a word that's separate from mother, but actually goes back to menses and moon mothers, the 9 moon mothers. And in India, we have the 9 manifestations of Durga. Wherever you go around the world with cultures, if you get back behind religion, there isn't a singular deity. There were a lot of mothers in the room. And this book is about, I began to think about what would happen if we had more mothers in the room. What if instead of wanting to be, what if everybody wanted to be a mother again? What if our generals were mothers and saw themselves as mothers? What if our CEOs saw themselves as mothers? And not just mothers of biological children, but mothers of the earth, mothers of every soul they met, because this is what it used to mean to be a mother. It used to mean, it wasn't a gendered or biological definition. It was a way of being in the world. Jesus was a mother, right? You're a mother. There are people in the world, and Martin Luther King's, we've just been celebrating his holiday. He's clearly a big mother in the world. We feel these mothers in the world, right? We know them. We can recognize their energy. So this is a book
Yes.
that looks at who was the mother before civilization, what's happened to her within it, and
Wow.
how can we get
That's that
something
that
else?
is such a great concept. It's a state of being.
It's a state of
And,
being.
and I think about right now, we have these 12 monks and a dog walking across the United States to generate peace. And of
Yes.
course, we're always seeing this if you're on some sort of social media, photos of them or videos of their next
Right.
day. And, it just seems like the crowds are getting bigger. There's this creation, but yet they're in a state of being and mothering. They are nurturing a concept of peace. And
Absolutely. And what is it the Madonna's holding in her hands in the Middle Ages? She's holding this planet frequently. Frequently, she's
yes,
depicted not just holding the child, but the whole planet.
yeah. And you
And
think that, well,
yeah,
I think of that as like, well, Jesus is like the savior of the world. But let's just take that in a motherly fashion. How would a mother hold that planet? It wouldn't be like I'm the savior of the world. I'm giving it mothering.
exactly. And there are a lot of different kinds of mothering. Like, Joan of Arc is going around and hitting everybody with her sword to get them to behave. Let's not forget, there are a few people I'd like to send to their room right now and have a timeout, and then we'll have a talk. You know what I mean? But I mean, mothers do that too. I mean, Kali is ferocious, right? And one of them, in India, I think we get a wonderful depiction of it because you can have Parvati, the beautiful, loving mother, with Shiva at her side and Ganesh in her lap. And then you can have Kali, the mother who comes, home and says, "What do you mean you didn't do your homework?" You know what I mean? Like, So
Yes.
we have there, but maybe what's needed is not one mother, but everybody showing up. This book for me originated, Bart, and I write about this. I was a young woman. I was 29, and I was teaching in the inner city in New York, and I'd had a very bleak day. One of those bleak days you can only have in your 20s, when you think you've reached the end of the world.
Yeah, yes.
you know, and I wasn't dating anyone. I was recently divorced. I thought, oh my gosh, my best friend had a child. I thought, like, I'm never gonna have kids. It's too late for me. And I'm teaching in the school that has no money, and I get there really early in the morning to make it as beautiful for the kids when they show up as possible. Like, I want it to be an oasis, a sanctuary for them. And, with, tea on and music playing and the plants watered and the feeling of just like we're coming in not just to be, industrial drones, but we're coming in to have a cultural experience together. Anyway, arrived really early to get everything, the tea on and everything. And we have pet mice, right? Just, keep.
Yes.
And
It's
the
a
rat
nurturing environment.
gotten into the mice and killed them all. And it's a
Oh.
nightmare. It's a bloodbath. And so I've had to clean this all up before the kids show up. I don't want to, I've had to, go in and clean the whole horror up. And I'm looking out the window after I've got it all done. And I'm looking out across New York City. And I'm looking at all the despair. I'm working with kids who frequently are homeless, who are living on the subway. I see up close the drug addiction, the despair, and the horror, all the way down to Wall Street, where people who don't know who they are, don't know what they want, are just depriving everybody else of what they need. And I'm looking at it and I think, okay, maybe I don't get to have kids, but there is a lot of work to do in this city. So
It is.
whatever happens today, I'm going to be a mother. I don't have to have kids to be a mother.
Yeah.
The world is asking me right now.
As you say this, and this is why I love having conversations with you. I never know what concept's going to show up in this and surprising me. Mothering is a state of being. And when you start to do that, whether you're a man, woman, cat, dog, something turns on in you of a type of consciousness. We say, oh, we meditate to get a higher consciousness. We do prayers to get a certain type of consciousness. We do the rosary to get a certain type of consciousness. However, when you mother and you care for someone and give nurturing, that opens something up in any soul that's doing it.
There's a wonderful Zen teacher, a Buddhist Zen teacher. He was a wild, wild figure. His name was Soen Nakagawa Roshi, and he was one of the first, Japanese Zen teachers to come to America. And someone once asked him at a teaching, what do I do when I feel despair? And he said, encourage others, make other people feel better. And he knew how to be a mother in the world. He used to take off his clothes and go dance under the moon in Central Park and find the homeless people to give them food. And and he would eat out of the trash cans. He was a wild being. And but yeah, encourage others. How do we take, I've often, when I was a child, Bart, I did not grow up in a religious family, and I'm not religious at all. No religion for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember hearing about heaven and hell and thinking it didn't make any sense to me. And the reason it didn't make any sense to me was not because I believed in a spiritual world, but this model didn't make sense, because what I kept thinking about was, so you have a place for the good people and you have a place for the bad people, right? But who are the good people who can enjoy the good place? Well, there's a place where people are suffering. If they were good people, wouldn't they be in hell taking care of those people? Like, I don't want to be the asshole. I don't want to be with the assholes who choose heaven. I want to be down with the people showing up for others, bringing soup, giving back rubs. Here's an ice pack for your head. I know it's hot down here, but here we are. Let's sing some songs. And what I realized, what I think even as a child, it's taken me a long time to articulate, 6 decades to articulate this, which is, if you find yourself in hell, who can you mother? when you feel despair, who can you encourage? And suddenly we shift the energy, right?
Yes. Wow. Okay, this is surprise number 2 for the show.
Okay.
You always think of heaven, and it's like going to a country club 24/7. All the drinks you want, and these poor SOBs are down there below, and you're laughing at them, or like, oh, they missed it. Well, that's their problem, but it's all of our problems, and this is so much about what the world is right now, and
Right?
we know that the answer is we got to let go of the country club and bring heaven and hell together.
That's it, Bart. I mean, that's why I love talking to you, because you understand it so deeply, and and the truth is, everyone's. I sometimes look at the world right now and think about people sort of, I got mine, I deserve mine, and I don't think it makes people feel joy. I don't think it makes people feel safe. I think there's a lot of fear right now.
Yeah.
And I think what both you and I are committed to is finding that kind of rooted faith within us, however we're called to it, so
Yeah.
we can offer sustenance and nourishment to others.
So I want to set you up for surprise number 3.
Okay.
This is a question. Building up the suspense right now. So we have all of this fear in the world. How do we, as mother conscious, change the fear?
Oh, how do we change the fear? First, we gotta, I try to do it I often say that, like, faith is a foundation we build within us, one grain of sand at a time. And, one tiny miracle at a time. And I think before we can feel like we have something to offer, we have to feel like we have something within us there in that place. So what everybody needs is to feel mothered. And one of the things, nobody feels like they get enough mothering in civilization. And that is by design.
Yeah.
And when I talk about civilization, I'm talking about this kind of 8,000 to 9,000 year experiment in human supremacy and human sedentism that has created this idea of monotheism and the corporate homogenized being. Our species is much older than that. Our species is at least 150,000 years old. And during that time, we had culture. We had art, we had music, we had dance, we had some of the greatest painting in the world. We have stories that go back 100,000 years. So we had culture. And then we imposed on this culture this idea of empire. And empire sets itself against the mother. Sometimes we use the word patriarchy, but I think that makes it feel like it's men's fault. And I don't want to gender anything. It was a human mistake. And that we made.
Well, it was a human progression. Every astrological era has its influence.
Right.
We just went out of the Piscean era, which is man-made law. Mm-hmm. But now we're going into Aquarius, which is nature-made law.
Well, needless to say, as you probably guessed, I am an Aquarius, and all my houses are an Aquarius.
Oh my God.
Here I am. I've been waiting for the age of Aquarius for 63 years. Finally, I got it,
Mm-hmm.
So we had this, we used to, if you go into an indigenous culture, one of the things I find really interesting, I love to read anthropology, and I love to try to imagine what it was like to exist in this pre-civilized state. There wasn't a sense of ownership or property. Nobody owned anything. You were a people who were traveling with the herds and the seasons. And so really, you put stuff on your back, and you have these like traditions of the potluck, where you'd get together and you'd find another group and everybody would exchange beads and stuff. And that's it. You didn't carry a lot. You didn't own a lot. But the whole earth was offering you food and shelter and joy and art. And you know what I mean? You were
Yes.
celebratory. You had the whole world. You belonged. And you didn't own anything, and you didn't own your kids. And a child might be born to a woman, but they've shown in a lot of indigenous cultures, many people might nurse that child. Many women might nurse that child, including postmenopausal women who could still produce milk from time to time. So that child might have many nursing mothers. Oh my gosh, any women listening to this would go like, oh, I'm not responsible for this whole, the very being of the child was being cared for in the community. And frequently, men, like St. Anthony in that picture, would think of themselves as the mothers also of this child. Everyone, regardless of their gender, would feel like their job was to be a mother to this child who is there. And so it wasn't like, this is my kid and he's going to inherit my stuff. It's like, who is this being who has returned to us from the other side? How can we all, and they frequently, most indigenous cultures believe in the eternal return and reincarnation. So a child comes into the world and the question is, who are you? Who were you? Are you my great-grandmother come back? Are you my great-grandfather come back? We are all related to each other in cycles of belonging we can hardly imagine. And that pre-civilized world, its worldview was circular, and it was about the eternal return. So you might call yourself a salmon people or a reindeer people, and that wasn't just a totemic image. That meant that my grandmother died, and I knew when I ate a salmon after she died, oh, this is my grandmother, reincarnated, come back to feed me. When she was a human being, she had fed me with her body. And now that she's a salmon, she's feeding me with her body. And one day I will become a salmon to feed my people.
And that goes with the principle that as we live and die, we go back to the earth and it nourishes the earth. So therefore, we create the salmon, or we create the deer, or the plants. It's just this big recycling.
And if you think this way, there's a beautiful story I read in one book about the Kung people in South Africa, and this anthropologist is with them, and he comes through this elephant hunt and watches all the sharing rituals that are very beautiful after the elephant is divided up for everybody to eat. And this one man he's sitting next to takes a bite of the elephant and bursts into tears. And the anthropologist says to him, why are you crying? And he says, until I tasted her, I did not realize this elephant was my wife who died so many years ago.
Mm.
And he means it literally. He doesn't mean this is a metaphor or an archetype. He means, oh, my wife who I loved and missed has come back to feed our whole community. And his love of her, of the elephant, this is not someone who's going to randomly go out and slaughter animals.
Yes.
If they're his wife. This is not someone who's going to put an animal in a factory farm. This is someone who is going to treat every being he meets with reverence. As his mother, as his wife, as his daughter.
And it really just brings that whole connection all together. It's something you said earlier that I can't really let it go without talking about it. When you do give a mother an energy, it's an empowering to yourself.
Oh.
It's like you're becoming a magician of sorts. Because you're really starting to say, if I give to this person in a kind and caring way, something lights up in that other person. And it was my decision to be that state of being that helped.
It's so interesting. I don't think of mothering as a gendered experience, but I have given birth and I do have 2 children. And there's a great midwife. Her name is Ina May Gaskin. She was one of the people who really regenerated the midwife movement in this country. She's a wonderful person. And she wrote a book called Spiritual Midwifery, which I read when I was pregnant. And her advice to laboring mothers was, get your S together, get your stuff together, because you are becoming a mother, not just to the baby you're about to give birth, but to every person in that room. So you start showing up like as a mother in labor.
Mm.
And I was stunned by this. And I actually practiced what she said, which was, it's a pretty intense experience and you're like screaming at the top of your lungs, but you also have to turn and say, how are you? Who are you? What do you need? Do you need anything? To the cab driver, to the nurse, to the midwife, to the orderly who comes into the room. Like, how can you also be? And what that does for you is you don't get lost in your own pain. You get, and then also everybody's nicer to you because you're being nice to them. Which also, do you know what I mean? Like, so to talk about that reciprocity, like, how can we, I think right now, I am sure you're feeling the same way I'm feeling, which is like, can't we just all be a little nicer to everyone now?
Yeah. And it really brings me up to the people that maybe they have a child or something, but they can't embrace motherhood. They're disconnected. They're resistant to doing it. They think that they're losing something. All of these things that we learn through dysfunctional families, the way society is.
The nuclear family.
Yeah, we can blame it on AI if we wish. But
and to put a woman alone in a house all day with a toddler by herself is a torture few people have ever endured. You know what I mean? Like, nobody wins. The kid doesn't win. The mother doesn't win. Nobody wins. And the idea that we take our most precious resource, our elders return to us, and warehouse them in preschools and daycares with one adult and 30 kids. Well, what we should have is 30 adults and one kid. You know what I mean? I really believe children should be at the center of the spiritual experience. And the Roy of the Rose community, my husband and I founded, not only are children welcome at every circle, and they do come to circles, they are frequently invited to run the circles. They can. And they are not, I was so tired of going to spiritual events where people had to leave their kids or find babysitters, or the kids were out in a cabin out back or the room out back. I said, if the kids aren't in the center of this experience, nobody knows what they're doing here. And nobody knows. And, so this one 8-year-old boy, he comes to our Way of the Rose circle, and we pray for our heart's desire at a certain point. And this 8-year-old boy says, Bart, people are praying for health and they're praying for, joy or whatever. This boy goes, while we've been sitting here, I've been looking at the mountain. And I've been thinking about, what is the mountain praying for? Because whatever the mountain is praying for is making this whole land work. So I want to pray for what the mountain wants. Okay. That's an 8-year-old. You want to put that kid in the back room? You want to put that kid in daycare? Like, that kid is your teacher. Come back. And I have 2 kids. My kids are phenomenal. And, but they are the wisdom. Like, my daughter at age 4 turned to my husband and she said, Daddy, when a heart breaks, is it so a bigger heart can grow in its place? Like,
whoa.
But every parent, we should have children at the center. And that's not just for biology. And there should be lots of aunties and, mommies and daddies and grandfathers and grandmothers around.
I just like to say that I think I'm going to write that out on my Facebook page today. And probably get about 100 likes on it. It's a true form of spirituality that when a heart breaks is in an opening for a bigger heart to come through. To me, that's a choice. It's an opportunity, because death and rebirth always happen, and we never know what's going to happen as a result.
And when you fall in love, your heart's going to break. At some point, even if you're married for 75 years, one of you is going to go first. You know what I mean? And,
Or somebody's going to get rejected.
you know, I mean, and I think about the people, and I invite people to think about the beings who have mothered us. Like, I think a lot of us feel mothered by our animals
Mm-hmm.
and loved by them. We've been mothered by teachers. I knew a man who was a teacher, an extraordinary teacher. And he was the kind of guy who always knew when you were upset and knew what to say, right? I remember once meeting, his name was Cesar Albini, and he was from Uruguay, and he was a gay man from Uruguay, fabulous teacher. And, he knew always how to show up when you needed help. And he knew how to offer listening when you needed listening and advice when you needed advice. And I remember the care he took for me once after a terrible breakup in my 20s and just making me feel lovable and worthy again. And, he was dying of AIDS and he was out mothering the world. And many men wrote about him in their memoirs of that era because he was such a force of love. He himself wasn't a writer, but he was really thought like, my job isn't to be feeling sorry for myself. My job is to be loving right now to everyone I meet. And, he was probably the greatest mother I've ever met. And I pray to him as one of my mothers. And my animals have been my mothers. And the earth is my mother. And certainly, I feel like very blessed. Like when you hang out in spiritual circles with people like you, Bart, you do feel mothered and loved and known.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
safe.
Well, we all want to nurture each other, I think, because we're looking for that place of belonging a lot of times. I teach classes in a vegan restaurant. I had to give a shout out to Casa de Luz in Austin, Texas, and also the Third Eye Lounge, cacao bar there. That's where I hang out, teach classes for fun. But as I get around people of all ages, that's the common thing that I see is like, we're looking for a place to belong. But what I think they really want that is not identified is we want to mother each other.
And suddenly there are enough mothers in the room. And the thing is, I think everybody feels frequently, I look in my book at the history of mothering in an empire, and really, the first thing that happens is the grandmothers get sidelined in empire. Like the grandmothers are useless because they can't produce children anymore. They're not in charge of anything. They become sentimental.
They can't walk fast.
We lose our grandmother goddesses. We've even forgotten a lot of their names. We know, the Kaliak and Tiamat and a few of their names, but the grandmother goddesses really get pushed away. In the Middle Ages, you still have the Madonna, but then you get the witch trials, and the Madonna becomes sentimentalized so that many people think of the Virgin Mary. She becomes, instead of being depicted as a adult woman, frequently bare-breasted and nursing, as she was in the Middle Ages, she suddenly is being represented as almost a prepubescent girl. And then, finally, of course, we have Freud. And I get to speak on this because I have many psychoanalysts in my family. But that's the great demonization of the mother. All of your neuroses, all of your problems aren't because of capitalism or an unjust social system, but because your mother was either smothering or she ignored you or a narcissist or whatever. And we become, I write about this in my book because I got into psychoanalysis in my 20s. It was the family religion. And at a moment when I should have been healing with my mother, I was separated further and further away from her. My daughter and I have worked to really create a very powerful bond together. We're kind of a dynamic duo. And we consider it our great triumph. My son too, both my kids live with him, and they're grown-ups, they're almost 30. My daughter's 32, my son's 29, and they both live within 5 minutes of each other and me.
Wow.
Which is remarkable in this culture.
It is so much. And as you talk about the Madonnas, and I think of the young saints, I think of France has Saint Germain, not the German Germain, but the Saint Germain, who's a
Violet
14-year-old
Flame.
girl, 16-year-old girl tops. And she's highly revered, but that archetype is so much about innocence. And I think that's kind of the masculine pigeonholing of like, we want to make feminine innocence, we want to make it young because we as masculine people have lost that. And that's how we find the women useful, is to remind us of innocence
100%.
and beauty, as
100.
opposed to what you're talking about of no, it's something internal so deep inside that we have a nurturing powerhouse inside of us. We call it
Everybody
mothering,
does.
but it's growing. It's like you hold the seeds where everything is planted. I think that's
When I
what.
first met my husband, Bart, I'll tell you a funny story. We met in New York City, and he asked me out on a date. And, we're the typical date. We're going to go to a Japanese restaurant, and then we're going to go to a movie. And we're walking across this big avenue, Broadway, four lanes of traffic. We get to the median strip. And we've been walking for about 5 minutes, sharing, details of our lives for 5 minutes. And he stops in the median strip with all these cars running all around us. And he says, I have to tell you something before we go any further. I'm like, oh no, what am I going to find out? Another date in New York. Here we go. And he stops and he says, I have to tell you. And I could tell he didn't even know why he was saying this. He said, I was raised by a lot of women who adored me. And I was so startled. And I didn't know, was he telling me I had to adore him? I didn't think so. What was he telling me? And so I really wasn't sure. I was so startled. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard a man say. And so I said, well, tell me about these women who adored you. And he did. And he told me about how he was born. And his mother was young. She was 19. But she lived with her mother, his grandmother, who was a force, and her sisters, and her mother, and their aunts, and all of these women who were in the house, and all who had different powers, different characters. His grandmother was a terrifying Kali-like being, fierce. But then there was the old soft woman who'd pull him on his lap and tell him stories and give him cake. You know what I mean? And he's telling me about these women, and as he's telling me about these old Arkansas backwoods women, I think, oh, this is a man who's known love. This is what he's telling me. What he stopped to tell me is, I feel loved. I know how to love. And of course, that's when I fell in love with him, when he started talking about these old women.
Wow.
And I think, he's had a lot of hardship in his life, but that foundational circling of love can guide you through anything if you have that.
Exactly. You can put it, it can give you strength through any problem. You are fortified. And we have been having a fortifying conversation, but it is actually past midpoint, and I feel obligated to tell everybody that you are on United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 107.7 and 103.5 out of New Orleans, Louisiana. My name is Bart Sharp, and this is Becoming Quantum Conscious. Our guest today is Perdita Finn, author of Mothering Magic. That's not right.
Mothers of Magic.
Mothers of Magic. Also, Take Back the Magic was a previous book. It's just so funny. Mothers of Magic's on the motherly. It has more stories about feminine, whereas Take Back the Magic, so much about your relationship with your father.
Yeah. Next book's about my sister. My whole family's going to get included.
I love it.
I love it.
I love it. And they're both great books. But just to take a break from this great conversation, tell me some of the projects you're doing right now. I know you're on Substack, and people can subscribe to your Substack group. You just have to Google Perdita Finn, and all of this stuff will show up where she is. She's everywhere. But what other projects are you doing? By the way, this book is coming out May 10th, you said?
May 5th. And
May
I'm going to have
5th.
a week before Mother's Day, and a big Mother's Day party here in New York for it.
Woohoo!
So, I'm just real, once you start working with the old mothers, they keep you pretty busy. They have you stirring the pot, as it were. So I got a lot going on. Here's the thing. I've got, if you go to my website, Take Back the Magic, you can find everything. You can find a link to my Substack. I have both a free and a paid Substack. I offer a lot of options on my paid, but I do a lot for my free Substack. I believe in giving a lot of this away. So don't think if you sign up for my, my free Substack, you're getting lesser, you're getting lots. I offer a lot of workshops on working with the dead and accessing. I'm doing a whole series this year of weekend intensives on creating with the dead, dying with the dead, healing with the dead, and parenting with the dead. How do we shift our, how do we get helpers? Because one of the things is it's very hard to get the mothering we need in the modern world. So how can we get the mothering we need from the other side?
Yeah.
So that's what a lot of those workshops are about. My husband and I are teaching a workshop together. We taught last year. We're going to teach it this year. It's called Whole Earth Animism. And it's really about learning again to get outside of our human point of view and be in relationship to what our daughter calls the animate everything, the frogs, the trees, the mountains, the rain, what St. Francis called, brother sun and sister moon, how to feel brotherly and sisterly with all that is, and really to be in conversation, which means learning how to listen and speak and tell stories. It's a kind of storytelling adventure through the mythology of the world. That has a few spaces left in it. And I'm working on another book. I'm always working on too many books. My husband and I are writing a book together called Circles Not Lines, Spiritual Community Beyond Patriarchy, which is about our Way of the Rose community, but not just for our Way of the Rose community, because we're fascinated about why spiritual communities go south and, get into so much sexual and financial trouble. And what are the kind of principles that can protect from that? So that book I'm actually writing that on Substack. So if you want to see what's happening and read some chapters, just come on my Substack. You can have it for free.
Yeah. Oh, I'd imagine it's going to be great. I love the Way of the Rose, and to just share a little bit about that book. Clark writes a chapter, Perdita then writes the next chapter, and then it goes back and forth. And you get a little bit of the difference between the writing styles, but there's such a synchronicity between the styles. And yet they seem to hold the balance together, because you two are so intertwined in all what you do.
We are, and we also just want to really, I think a lot of people, our publisher wanted the subtitle of that book to be The Radical Power of the Divine Feminine Hidden in the Rosary. But we are not, I know, we are not devoted to the divine feminine or the sacred masculine. I mean, what I always say to people is when you begin to embrace the long story of your soul again, you realize we've all been men and women and 36 different gender of fungi. We've all been a lot of different things. We've been plants and animals but we need balance. We need to find our balance, and that sacred alchemy. Alchemy is the sun and the moon, right? It's the light and the dark, the yin and the yang. We all contain multitudes. So the rosary is a prayer that balances masculine prayers and feminine prayers, and integrates them. And so we wanted that book to have two different voices.
Yeah, to me, the rosary isn't even about a prayer as such. This is like a magnification of being that's connected to greater things.
Right.
And that's what I got from this. This is an ancient practice that people have been doing for.
People have been doing bead practices for 150,000 years.
Yeah.
They've been making beads, and why do they make beads? And for prayer.
Yes.
Every religion has a tradition of using beads for prayers.
It's acknowledgement of that power. So much of what you're saying in the book of like the mothering power that you are giving and receiving to others, the world, the mountain, always gives back to you. Therefore, you're connected. Therefore, you are bigger energetic space. I don't want to say empowered or powered or, we always use that. It feels so masculine. This is not. This is something beyond that masculine, feminine thing. It's just being a bigger space inside of you.
I'm going to go back to St. Anthony and Joan of Arc. I love them both so much. But, one of my favorite stories about St. Anthony is that, and the reason St. Francis put him in charge of everything is he came out one day and St. Francis was giving his sermon to the fish and talking to the fish. Like they were as much his children as that Christ child. The animals were, and every other being. He was talking to them. He was in relationship to the whole world, and I think when you talk about belonging, when we really start to access this stuff, we really do feel like we belong. We belong to the ground beneath our feet. We belong to the trees, the animals. I'll tell you a story. My daughter has a very bad illness, and that's been really hard. It's incurable, genetic illness. And the night it was diagnosed, she'd been sick for 7 years. And until this point, there was this fantasy, like, we're going to figure out what's the matter, and then there'll be a pill, and she'll get better, right? That's the American fantasy. And we'd gone to this doctor, and she had told us about this disease whose name we could hardly pronounce and had never heard of, and said there's no cure, and it's degenerative. Which is terrifying, right?
Yes.
The worst news in the world. And it was January, and we were trying to take it in, and you're starting to Google, and the Google sites are terrifying and overwhelming, and the whole thing is feeling like too much. And I said, stop, shut the computer. We got to go out for a walk. And it was like 10 degrees outside, but we bundled up, and it was nighttime, and we stepped outside. I live in the woods in the mountains, and the stars were very clear overhead, and we were shaky and scared, and we walked in silence for about 5 minutes or so. And all of a moment, an owl swooped in front of us and landed on a branch right beside us, like 3 feet from us. Huge owl. And so Sophie and I stopped. And then Sophie bowed and I bowed to the owl, like, hi, what do you want to tell us? And she sat and stared at us for, 10 minutes. And it was too cold to stand any longer, and she wasn't going to leave. So we turned to walk back inside to go warm up. And we'd walked a couple of steps when the owl swooped behind my daughter and wrapped her wings around my daughter.
Wow.
And then took off into the air.
Wow.
So that whole moment shifted, and we both knew that we were in this terrible moment of crisis. The earth was holding us. The owl mother was holding us. She was going to hold us through this experience, and she has held us through this experience. And she shows up all the time. And the foxes show up, and the animals. And the more you get into relationship with these mothers, the more you feel mothered and belonging. Like, it wasn't like the diagnosis got thrown away and suddenly she was better. That didn't happen. But what happened was within us, was our sense of how we were going to make it through all this as a family. And my daughter's work. She has decided that this illness is her invitation to share the healing the earth has offered to her with the world.
Yes, and for those of you who don't know, we're talking about Sophie Strand, author of The Madonna Secret and other books out there, and they're really great. She's been on my show. I've read her stuff. She's brilliant.
I think so.
Yeah. Gosh, it's such a great story, and we're all connected.
Yeah, and so it's really, I look at a lot of the people who are committing the atrocities in our world right now, and I see people who are so radically unmothered. They haven't had love. They don't feel love. They don't feel, and they're enacting fear and violence on others. And I mean, you know, when people are acting out, they need to be, as I said to you, sometimes they need to go to their room for a little while, you know. But that doesn't mean you're not going to bring them something nice to eat and try and slowly bring them back to the world of love.
Yeah, that they have a place that they belong.
Exactly.
That is part of the whole. It's like the tribe that you explained that were nomadic, that they were connected to everything,
Yeah.
and they really belonged. And I think that's what, the message that we need to give the world. You really belong,
You
and
really,
you're making the decision not to belong if you feel disjointed, if you feel like you can't feel other people's feelings or their situation without compassion, nurturing, empathy. Uh,
well, and one of the things I think, and what I talk about a lot in this book, is the thing that I find very, very helpful for myself is, you know, civilization has convinced us over 10,000 years that we only have one life to get it right. You know, here we are on that
mhm.
conveyor belt that's going to drop us either into the bin of heaven or the bin of hell, right? Like you
Yep.
get one life, you're either going to win and get all the toys or you're going to lose and not get any, right? But that circular vision says there's always more time. There's always
Yeah.
another life. And you can have a life that looks from a, you know, capitalist corporate perspective like not very important and have done great, great things with that life. My sister died a month and a half ago, and she was someone society would think of as maybe not having done a very good job with life, you know. And she was on disability, she'd smoked cigarettes, she'd had a stroke. So I often say her life gave her, you know, bad luck and worse choices, right? But in our family, she's remembered as the person who was the greatest gift giver in the family, even when she was destitute. And she was often destitute, and she would refuse help. She would find a book in the trash can and give it to you that would change your life. And we
Mm.
all have stories like this about my sister. Like
Uh,
she was a gift giver. And she was also, you know, her last words to me, and she died unexpectedly after this. She said, you know, I'm a miracle, and you're a miracle too. I hope you can remember that. And she came to me in a dream after she died to tell me and remind me of this conversation. And I look at my sister and I realize, like, she's one of the great ones. You know what I mean? She's one of the
yeah.
great ones. And I don't know
Mm.
how she's coming back. My daughter, when she was dying, said, you know, you come back to me and I will call you your name again. I will find you. And but we don't know what a life looks like. We don't know. You might change one person's life. You might give one gift to someone or one word of encouragement to someone that changes the whole world. My sister was a great mother. She was beloved by her daughter. I experienced her as a mother in my life. She'd been a
Mm.
great preschool teacher, and she was someone who saw herself that way. And even the nurses at the hospital were talking about how even as she was before she slipped into unconsciousness, how much love she'd offered to them. And so we don't know. So one of the things I also say to people is, you know, we have more than one life to get it right. We have so much time to love. Right
And
now in the world, somewhere in this world is is the mother of your next life. Where is your next mother?
indeed, it's one of those perspectives that is a peak experiences in the whole karmic panorama throughout all lifetimes. And I think that's a lot what the book Mothers of Magic does open for the reader. It's a wonderful book. Coming to the end of the show, thank you so much for Perdita for being on the show. You are on United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 107.7, 103.5. You can find Perdita at TakeBackTheMagic.com. Thank you so much for being on the show, hon.
Thank you, Bart. I love talking with you. And thank you for all of the mothering you bring to all of us, with all of the people you bring together. And I feel so nurtured and so cared for by all the work you do in the world.
Well, it's just fun to be with all of these phenomenal people. And I had to stop the show, so we'll see everybody next week on Becoming Quantum Conscious. Blessings and bless you, Perdita Finn.